was funny. The Mexican chip. It's a Mexican chip.
I still regret trampling all over the Coltrane and Miles Davis because I was running so hot. But, mistakes are made.
Yes.
We don't get to go back and edit.
That's a long time ago.
Yes.
Chris Trapasso joins us Wednesdays as we lead into the NFL draft. Still a little bit more than a month away, but no rush. I mean, Chris, right? You've got more mock drafts to do, more analysis. We're just going to sort of relax and it's not exactly relaxing. You're doing a lot of work, but, enjoying this time of year, getting the most out of it. How about that?
And I like the fact that the draft this year is April 24th. We've had some like April 29th. Ways back, it used to bleed into May. I'm just doing evaluations and mock drafts every week, a couple of one-off articles here and there. But just getting the scouting reports and the grades done, it's a fun but very tedious time for me on the calendar.
What do the pro days do? They must, they will have some effect on mock drafts, on sort of the overall here. We had Alabama today. Was it yesterday we were talking about Tet McMillan and Arizona, Emin in South Carolina. So we're right in that time of the season here. How can a pro day, work for or against a prospect?
Well, I think first off, everyone knows, the scouts know, I know, you guys know, that the pro day numbers when it comes to 40-yard dashes can be a little bit fudged. So you have to kind of go into them with a grain of salt. Like last year, Michael Penix's workout was like the most athletic quarterback we've ever seen, and I don't know if he's that type of talent, just to use a recent example. But it can do a lot because we had so many of these prospects, top-tier guys, decide not to work out at the combine. So to get a general sense, like if Tet McMillan was running in the mid 4.5s and close to 4.6, it would be a red flag. We see Jalen Milroe today. I saw a few. I don't know what the official was, but a few of his 40-yard dash times in the high 4.3s. It can certainly change things. But I think the biggest value in the pro days are the mid to late round guys that just pop on the radar because they have a 40-inch vertical, or they run, they're a tight end and they run in the low 4.5s. They have a great 3-cone. This is like a fun time for me to peek at some of these pro day numbers and figure out, hey, maybe I should watch that guy and get an evaluation on him because he might actually get drafted.
Yeah, maybe Sean Dolak from UB is an example of this, right? Not even invited to the combine, runs 4.5 at his pro day, and I'm seeing reference to, scouts, teams saying we've had him as an undrafted guy, and now he's like a fifth round guy for us. So that that's quite a step. The thing I wonder about is how dramatic is it? Because like Milroe today, right? I don't know about. I saw 4.39 too, but I also saw some other 4.39 also, just to make sure I wasn't throwing an unnecessary digit on the end of that time for you. But teams have watched him play in the SEC and run away from cornerbacks and get the edge on very talented elite level defenders. They know he's fast already, right? I don't know how much does the time really matter for a quarterback?
I don't think it matters a ton, but we know this. We have a front row seat to this in Buffalo, that the athleticism factor at quarterback is more vital in the last 5 to 10 years than it's ever been in the history of the game. So I think teams are paying attention to that more. But what you're really describing is kind of a right up my alley, a nerdy draft term to not double count something. Where if a guy looks really fast on film and then he runs 4.29 at the combine, if he's a receiver, you don't boost his speed score in your scouting process anymore. And yes, Jalen Milroe does look extremely fast. I think, if anything, and we probably talked about it right post-combine, it just proves that he's not slower than expected.
Right.
Okay, he looks fast, and there's guys all the time that edge rushers that look really bendy on film, and then they have a terrible 3-cone, or a wide receiver that looks like he can go up and get it, and he has a 30-inch vertical, things like that. So for Jalen Milroe to be across the board, high 4.3s, probably low 4.4s, now we know that he truly is quantifiably an elite-level quarterback prospect in terms of athleticism. So
you can confirm the priors, right? Because in my head over here all day I've been thinking, fast man runs fast, film at 11. Okay, what are we doing here exactly? But I get it. I appreciate your taking the question.
Oh, of course he would. Of course he would. Chris Trapasso with us here on the West Her Hotline. Let me ask you about McMillan, who I referenced before, the pro day at Arizona, the consensus wide receiver one. Not unanimous, though, Chris. What are your thoughts on him and how excited the market is for him, the teams come draft day?
Yeah, he's an interesting guy because he's not the modern day get excited about his separation type wide receiver. Now, I don't think he's like Keon Coleman level of inability to get open, but that's really not his game. I think he's right in between, somewhere in between these two players of T. Higgins and Drake London. And Drake London was a top 10 pick as the quarterback situation got better in Atlanta. He started to produce, but the first couple years were not great. After the catch, he's great. Contested catch ability, that's all what McMillan gives to you in a bigger bodied frame. There are going to be reps, though, against higher caliber athletes at corner where you're like, wow, this guy just cannot shake anybody. He can't get open. So I think for as much as he's different body type than any of the other top wide receivers in this class, he'll have to be utilized in a little bit more of an imaginative way. Like we were kind of banging the table for Keon Coleman to be kind of moved into the slot at times. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be shocked if we see that with Pat McMillan, but I really like him a lot. I have a top 15 grade on him because of those two extra elements that I mentioned. The yards after the catch, which is not my number one thing that I look at for receivers. Separation matters more. But I think it's very important in the modern day NFL when offensive coordinators can scheme these wide receivers open better than ever, and the quick game is more prevalent than ever. And at 6'4", 220, he plays to that size. He is a true rebounder that is going to be one of the better contested catch receivers in the NFL. So if you go in and don't just ask him to run 50 different routes at the classic X position and move him around, get him the ball in space, throw it up to him down the field, I think he can be a very good receiver early in his career.
How do you see the pecking order at receiver? We spent some time yesterday talking about Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden came up. What kind of order do you have them in? And is Burden mostly a slot guy? Because we were talking about him, and if he were to fall all the way down, whether that would be an idea for the Bills. And then I heard something later in the day that indicated he's probably a slot. And then I'm like just sort of crossing that out. What's your pecking order at receiver beyond McMillan?
So Burden is the most fascinating one, maybe in this entire class to me, because he had 61 catches for fewer than 700 yards this past season after going over 1,200 yards as I guess a sophomore in 2023. So the production was down. The quarterback play wasn't quite as good. He is mostly a slot, like right around 80% of his snaps were in the slot at Missouri. But I think everything that I mentioned with Ted McMillan, Burden is like a better ball tracker. He's not going to jump over you, but he can find it over his shoulder, the back shoulder, and is really good after the catch. He's kind of in that range of like Randall Cobb to DJ Moore to me. And the fact that he's just turned 20, or he's about to turn 22 in December, he's one of the younger wide receiver prospects in this class and produced at a high level, like I mentioned, 1,200 plus yards in 2023 at 19 years old, I think, or at about to turn 20 years old in the end of that season is really impressive. He ran in the low 4.4s at the combine. He is mostly a slot, though, so it feels like it would be a little bit redundant for the Bills. But I think if this makes sense, of the top-tier wide receiver prospects, I think Luther Burden is the most underrated of that group.
Thinking a little deeper here in terms of like the quantity of receivers, because we're always, with the Bills thinking about wide receiver, whether it's been time well spent or not, I don't know. But
I am too.
You've got 4 in the first round, and by the end of the third round, your mock draft today at CBSSports.com covers 3 rounds and trades, by the way, which is fun. 15 receivers picked by the end of round 3. That seems like a lot. This has been a year where wide receiver not gets panned, but is compared negatively to recent years. Mm-hmm. But rounds 2 and round 3, I see a lot of names, including one, by the way, Aya Manor from Stanford, that we talked about yesterday. I think he's interesting. You have him early third.
Yeah, so what's a good way that you kind of frame that is that it has been panned as a wide receiver class as not being as good. But I think that's just because we don't have the super marquee names at the top. There's not a Jamar Chase. There's not a Malik Neighbors. I probably said that before, so I apologize for that. But if you're of the thinking, if you're a GM or you're a fan and you're like, you know what, let those teams pick the first-round receivers. The hit rate is not quite as good as you would think. I want to pick a wideout in the second or third round. This is still a pretty good draft for that. I don't know if we're going to get DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, but I think there are plenty of names like who Bulldog mentioned, Egbuka, maybe Matthew Golden slips into the second round because he's a little bit smaller. Jaden Higgins is a really fun name from Iowa State who reminds me a lot of Cortland Sutton and can certainly play on the outside. He's big. He tested very well. Not big after the catch, but the routes are good at like 6'3" or 6'4". Isaiah Bond from Texas didn't quite run as fast as Xavier Worthy, but still ran sub 4.4. There's a lot of names, and that's why I put so many in my mock draft in the second and third round that feel just ripe to be picked on day two. And when you're a second or third round receiver, I think the teams want you to come in and play right away and be essentially a full-time player. And if the Bills go in an opposite direction with the first two picks, it wouldn't shock me that if there's a receiver available that they say, look, this is our second pick in the second round, and we know that this is still a very important position on this team.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, like, how would you assess their need there? Because not that I don't necessarily mind that Hollins left, because I think, I'd like guys that are going to be more productive to be on the field as much as he was on the field. But it does sort of open a hole. Like at the time they signed Palmer, this was the same day, eventually later that evening, I think we learned Hollins was going to New England as a free agent. So they get Palmer, and I'm thinking, okay, there's my Cooper replacement. I'm set, and I'm assuming they'll bring back Hollins. But now Hollins is gone. And so, I'm not looking to draft a blocking wide receiver, far from it. But I wonder how you would assess their need overall right now.
I don't think the need is huge, and just very quickly on the blocking receiver. Emeka Egbuka might be the best pure blocker in the class if you want to really zero in on that, and he's a bigger body. Because of Palmer and his experience on the outside, his separation ability on the outside, I don't think the need is very big anymore. It's always fun to talk receiver, and I've always been of the belief that they should be picking one like first couple rounds every year or so. But I think for as much as I get it that you kind of want to shy away from the slot guys because you have Khalil Shakir, you have Curtis Samuel, but I don't think it's something that the Bills should stay away from completely. I've been of the belief this draft process that although they should have all the right to be still in belief of Keon Coleman, I think they need to kind of plan ahead and draft an insurance policy if he's not the guy, whether he stays on the perimeter or they try to move him around and he's a big slot. Because for as much as they could feel similarly about Curtis Samuel, he didn't have a great first season in Buffalo, and it would come to the point where we could be midway through the season or even entering next year and go, oh man, we have Shakir and they have Josh Palmer, who's young. Who else do they really have in the wide receiver room? So it wouldn't be, to me, a bad decision, even if a Luther Burden fell to them, that they picked him just because he's mostly a slot receiver. So I don't think it's a huge need, but I think the Bills should certainly come out of this draft with a cost-controlled, younger player at that position.
You say it again today. You've been big on receiver for this team yourself, and also, like us, as it happens, not keen on early draft picks spent on running backs. Or even first-round picks. Yesterday, our guest Ian Hartitz very controversially, and it warmed my heart to hear him say it for content's sake, but wouldn't hate it if the Bills picked a running back in round 2, one of my Buckeyes. Oh, he said. Do I even need to ask the question? What is their need at that position, if they have one at all, with Cook's somewhat tenuous status in mind?
I feel very similarly to how I feel about wide receiver and everything that I just mentioned about wide receiver. I think overall, though, if you take a step back, wide receiver is obviously just a more valuable position. I think the Bills don't really have a huge need there at this point with the same running back room that they had last year. But I do think they should come out of this draft with a running back, whether that's with a fourth rounder or one of the fifths. And it's for as much as the renaissance of Derrick Henry that we've talked about a lot, Saquon Barkley, obviously, just going through this running back class, and I'm looking at my sheet right here. I've watched like 25 running backs. I just can't feel the ability to say, hey, pick a running back in round 2, because there's going to be one, drastically worse in round 5. I don't think there's a huge drop-off from pick 64, the last pick, or the last pick in the second round, and all the way to the 5th round at the running back position. I think planning for James Cook, driving a hard bargain and asking for 15, 16, 17 million per year and not wanting to budge off of that, would make sense for Brandon Beane to continue what he's done, where he drafts a running back, and then, he drafts Singletary, and then Zach Moss, and then James Cook. Now, I wouldn't do it quite as early as he's done it, but I think Ray Davis in round 4 last year, we saw 4th-round pick, pretty obscure, and he ended up being a solid number 2 back for them for most of the season. So that's what I would ultimately do. Not a huge need, but they should probably pick one in this draft.
We've gotten more than 15 minutes into this conversation and not mentioned the player you targeted for the Bills in this most recent mock draft, and it happens to be a player I had questions about for you, because I've been thinking about the Bills' need at defensive tackle. You've got Walter Nolan, a name we've seen mocked to the Bills many times. I don't know if you've had him yet, but I've seen the name. It's pretty familiar to fans who are paying attention. I'm thinking about a bigger body, maybe. Yep. Just tell me about him versus, say, Kenneth Grant, who you have going much later, not much later, but like 15 picks later in your mock, because that's the traditional, to me, space eater, big dude, and Nolan is, about 50 pounds lighter than that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, they are 2 completely different defensive tackles, and what I did for the Bills in this mock, and maybe this is nothing, maybe this is galaxy brain for me, but signing of Michael Hoyt, Larry Ogunjobi, even Josh Palmer on the offensive side, and then certainly Joey Bosa, I've gotten a sense that the Bills are like, we need to be more explosive, especially on defense, because they've had big bodies. They've had, Boogie Basham was like 275 pounds. They had AJ Epinesa slimmed down. Rousseau is really big. They've had all these bigger bodies, Jordan Phillips, and really it's just been Ed Oliver. And that's the only guy that has serious juice along the defensive line. Walter Nolan is kind of an Ed Oliver type. He's bigger, taller, longer than Ed Oliver, but can really generate pass rush. And it kind of feels like, for as much as I would assume that Sean McDermott would like the traditional, you have your 3 technique, and then you have your 330-pounder next to him, and they could certainly bring that player in, or you could certainly draft that guy. Those are a dime a dozen on day 3. It feels like Walter Nolan might be a name that we should think about, given what the Bills have done in free agency. And I have sent Kenneth Grant to the Bills about 15 times in all the mocks that I've done. Yeah. So I wanted to just see if they were both available, and as I went through, he was. I thought, what if the Bills are just like, we're not going to care so much about 1 technique, 3 technique, 0. We're going to line them up there, but we just want guys who can generate some push on the pocket beyond Ed Oliver. And really, if you think about the last couple of years, the Bills have not had that type of player. Maybe outside at early 23, Daquan Jones, but that's really not his game. So Walter Nolan is that explosive up-the-field guy that I think would really help even the edge rushers as well.
Last week, by the way, I think you had Trey Amos, the corner from Ole Miss, going to the Bills, and today he goes at pick 51. So tough week for that guy.
Yeah, it's kind of hard when you do a multiple round mock. That there was something that I did with that where I looked at, I had the in the size and length component of my grading system. This is getting too far down the road. I had the corners graded a little bit higher than I should have based on previous years. So when I downgraded them, Amos and everyone dropped a little. So I was like, maybe I don't have him at like 30 or 31. I have him closer into the 40 range. So that's where I felt was a better position for him in the second round.
Very good. Chris, thanks for your time as always. We'll talk next week.
All right, guys.